I'm going to talk a little bit about the real lens flare tool. And it's not just a simple thing that you just slap on your footage. You can actually design these. And it's a procedural element versus, so anybody in visual effects, anybody in 3D, it's a procedural element versus just being a series of sprites. So you can actually really craft these, and these can be technically done to the spec of a lens. So if you're shooting with a Panavision lens or a Zeiss lens or a Canon lens or a Sigma lens, you can actually dial in the manufacturer spec on the lens itself. I will show you in just a moment, but just to tell you that this is a part of the Red Giant suites. They're a part of Maxon. So it's the VFX Suite, and this is one of the latest tools inside of the VFX Suite. So let's just jump right in, and I'm going to, the real lens effect currently is available only exclusively inside of Adobe After Effects currently, and but you can utilize it inside of Premiere. So you can apply it. You don't have to be an After Effects whiz to apply it, and I'll show you how easy it is to apply. And you just literally can drop it on a solid, and you can transfer it over to your footage. I'll show you that here in just a second. So let me just show a couple examples before we do that. And it's going halfway. Lovely. Let me reopen this and see if we can get a full screen. Or you know what? This is plenty. Let's do that. So the real lens effect you can use for all kinds of things. Maybe a nice little friendly texture in the back. Just something subtle to warm up your footage, or if you're doing motion graphics, you can add something that's just a looping texture. It looks a little bit better than a series of sprites. It's actually like can mock up the sun. You can mock up a highlight in your footage, and you can stretch it out, and it looks very normal. Yesterday, I was speaking about the optical glow, which has a nice organic feel to it. So you can actually stretch this out, and it'll light up your footage, and it looks a lot more organic versus having banding in your footage. So when you look at this stuff, you don't necessarily see the stair stepping that you would see if you just applied a gradient or just put like a highlight in the middle of your footage. So that's one of my favorite things about it, is it has a natural feel to it. So some of these uses that I'm going to show today, it's great to enhance the existing footage. I'll show you sometimes if you have a certain amount of stuff to shoot before the sun comes down, the last person that you film, it will probably be right when the sun does come down, so it won't look consistent with the first person that you film, right? So I'll show you how you can warm up a scene and relight a scene to make it look a little bit more natural, like the sun is still there, even though it's just a reference point, and you can see this much of the sun left. You can make that sun look a lot more like it was actually in the footage. So, and then we'll talk about light leaks and glows and all this stuff. So let me just go down the line here. Another few uses for it. You know, it also creates depth in your frame, right? So it's like a measuring tape for, you know, if you add a lens flare, you can actually see the distance, right? So if you put it at the window, you draw it across your frame, and now you kind of feel like there's some dimension. So when you're doing video, which is 2D, so we're talking, you know, we've been talking about cinema 4D for so much. So when you actually go to the video aspect, you know, it doesn't necessarily have the same dimension, right? So when you're cutting this into a video, you can actually showcase the full dimension of your footage. So it's just an interesting way to kind of draw the eye and make you feel the size of the room, right? And another thing is, you know, if you go out, if anybody has a camera and you go and you shoot and you come back with all this stuff and you're working for a client and you have all this stuff and it has flares all over the place, by the time you bring it back in the edit suite and you're doing like a dialogue scene or it's an interview, there's nothing more distracting than it's a big lens flare going across somebody's face while they're talking about something serious. Yes, it looks cool. You probably like it when you're shooting it, but it's not the same effect when you're trying to convey a message. So adding it in post really helps. And then also the biggest thing about it is that you can control where it is. So it's not going to obscure your subject. It's not going to like ruin the shot, and it won't be distracting. You can even dial it back, and you can change the flavor and the temperature of it. So that's a lot more control that you get compared to if you shot it right into the sun. And I'm a person that loves to shoot directly into the sun, and I'll show you in just a minute. So These are all keyframeable, trackable. You can customize them down to the camera spec, down to the lens spec, and then you can even adjust your sensor size. So if you shot with something, you can mimic an IMAX camera, you can mimic a Red, you can mimic an Alexa, right? So you can dream. You can, pretend that you shot with that IMAX camera. You can pretend that you shot with that Panavision lens. So you can actually play around and utilize something that looks a little bit more realistic than just the typical lens flares. So I'll show you a couple examples. This is stuff that I shoot directly into the sun. And again, the thing is, the flavor is embedded, So when you shoot stuff like this, I can't necessarily remove that lens flare, right? So if you do this in post, right, I can shoot less of it and then add more to it as a reference point. So when you think about this, right, the fact that you can do it in post, now I'll just shoot it a little less dramatic, a little less of this light, and just enough so I get the idea. I know where I can place my light source, and then I can drag that across the frame and I can make it look realistic. So there's one example. Here's another. And like I said, it's very dramatic. And then at one point, the thing about these lens flares, right, that's burnt pixels. You're not going to get that color value back. Once you do that, now that's baked in. So you have to scrape that toast, So it's not the same effect. So being able to do it in post gives you that much more flexibility. And again, I love to do things in camera, but at the same time, it's good to have the idea, and be able to maintain that idea across the board without ruining your footage. Or somebody else might think that you ruined that footage. So let me show you here. Here's one example. I'm going to just turn this off. This is what it looked like initially. So this is like the last person I'm filming as the sun's already going down. So it is magic hour, but the sun is like gone. There's like this much sun left in the sky, just enough to crank up the sensitivity and the ISO in your camera so you can actually get a decent looking image, but forget about the sun and forget about the warm, the warm light coming into your shot. So something like the real lens flares allows you to kind of warm this up. And you can add contrast to this. You can, use it however you like. You can actually position where that light source is and how far the light stretches. So you can say the sun was all the way here and your video frame is here, and just stretch the light rays into there. So you can design it however you want to. And again, is that the particular use for this? No. The idea is that you can use this in many different ways, and there's a designer, and I'll show you how that works. So in order to apply the effect, let me just step down here. I'll show you one more example of this. So in this shot, yep, that's not working. So in this shot, all I did was add the little tail of that flare, right? So it didn't have a flare. Sometimes you do this balance between actually exposing your footage properly or getting a flare that goes across your frame. And if you want that beautiful flare, then you're probably going to overexpose, and then you're probably going to lose your subject. So instead of doing that dance, you can add it in post, right? And let's say, for instance, you shoot with something like an iPhone, or you shoot with something that's maybe a couple years old and it doesn't have that full range, right? You're not going to be able to see. If you shoot straight into the sun, you're going to lose all of your subject, right? So here you can mock up the idea that you have one of these brand new cameras, right? And you can just basically draw that out, and you're not losing your exposure. I'm not overexposing, right? I'm just making it look like I have the lens flare and I have the subject. So it makes it look like it was shot on a higher end camera, if that makes sense. So the idea here is I didn't add much of a light source. I literally just added the tail end of those reflections going across the screen. And you can even change the flavor of that. So I can make those more warm or more cool, and I can even scale them out, and I can do them based on whatever sensor. So if I'm shooting with a Sony and it's a Super 35 sensor, it does the math for you. There's a preset, and I'll show you how all that works here in just a second. So these are just ways that you can kind of give that cinematic edge to your footage that might have been just shot on your phone, right? Even though the phones can shoot cinematic now. So let me just hop back here, and let's just talk about the basics before we dive all the way in. So basics of this effect. All right, this right here is called the glow ball. To apply the effect, just go in here and I'm gonna type in real. All right, as soon as you type in real, it pops up under RG, under RG, real lens effect, under the Red Giant VFX Suite. All right, and just drag it onto a black solid. So I would go, if you're on a Mac, it's Command Y. If you're on a PC, it's Control Y. Or you can also do, right, File, New, or no, is it, now I'm lost in menus here, but you can right click, choose New, and then choose Solid, right? And just apply this to just a solid, but not just any solid. Make sure that solid is absolute black. Drag it all the way down and to the left, because we're going to use this and we're going to apply it in screen mode, so it drops all of the darkest part of that solid. So don't do it over white, don't do it over gray or red or blue, okay? Because now you're going to actually have a full wash. You could do it as an experiment, but that's not the intention. Okay, so I'll go here and I'm just going to click OK, and I'll just type in like RLF, real lens flares. Now hit OK. Make sure it's comp size, all right? And then hit OK. I'm just going to apply this some scratch, drag it, drop it in here. And then what I'll receive is this default flare, okay? It's not the only flare that's there. So don't get roped into like, oh, there it is. I'll just drag it and now it's done. There's so much to this flare. As a default, it looks pretty cool, but it doesn't necessarily match everybody's flavor, right? So there's this awesome little designer here. And those of you that use Trap Code or you use Magic Bullet, right? There's a designer, just like there is in Trap Code, just like there is in Magic Bullet. And you can do this with presets. So I'll show you this little interface right here. You get the diagram of your lens, right? And then you have each one of these pieces, each one of these elements that you can work with separately. You can work with the tail and just the reflections. You can work with just drawing out that little spike, right? You can draw out, kind of give it some noise, give it some texture, really make it look like it was shot with a camera. All right, so I'll go here. Let me just turn off a few of these and I'm just gonna build this from scratch for you. And I'll reset this. Like this is literally just the reflection alone. See that? So let me turn that off and we're gonna start from scratch. I'm just gonna build it and show you the elements to it. And every one of these things you can actually animate. And they're all based on the light source. So wherever your light is coming from, you can just move the crosshairs. And wherever you want to put it in the screen, that's where your reflections come from. That's where the sun would come from. That's where a glow ball for just an abstract texture would come from, all right? So they all kind of work together under the idea of an actual lens. That's why you see a lens model here at the bottom. So I'll hit plus, right? And then you'll see here, starburst, glow ball, halo, single spike, and gate flare. Gate flare is more like the J.J. Abrams, the all the little flare on the side of your frame, the anamorphic lens look, all right? That's what you got right here. So let's just start with, I'm gonna start with the glow ball, all right? This is what you can use to kind of mock up the sun, and just wanna show you right here. Now I'm dragging this out right here. And if I go, I can expand a few things. So as I click on each thing, I want you to look that the options change. So if you look on the right-hand side, everything that I click on, I get different options on the right-hand side that apply to whichever element I'm clicking on. If I wanted to, I could actually go to my light source, and that's separate from clicking on the glow ball. So it's doing the math and they're all connected, but I can actually just focus on one element at a time, which makes it a lot more controllable. So if I go here and I go to the glow ball, let's click on this glow ball again and let me just show you. And this is something that you can use to just mock up the sun, right, or add a little bit of light. So I'll take that here and then I can just drag it off. Let's just drag it just off screen. And then I can also change the size, right, or even the exposure. And if you look, it's just kind of making this nice wash over the footage, right? So that mocks up something that looks a little bit more natural. So now I'm just kind of have like this natural, it's the reverse of an ND filter. If you drew like a gradient across the screen, It's like that, except you're not really seeing the stair stepping. You see that? You can actually see that it looks a little bit more natural. So I can have this like wash over my footage, right? And then it just basically gets keyed right over your footage. So you do it over a black solid, and then you use screen mode, and it applies directly to your footage. And then you can even change the flavor of that, right? So if the sun was a little bit more warm, there's two places where you can do it. You can adjust the color here in this colorize option, or I can go back to my light source and I can change that light source. Right now it's a little cool. I can warm it up. And now this looks a little bit more like Magic Hour, because Magic Hour wouldn't be blue. Magic Hour would be more orange, right? So now I can go in here and I can adjust that. And there's a couple places where you can even adjust similar things. So the glow ball itself is one thing, but then what about the light source, right? So you can do a dance between brightness inside of the light source, like the sun, and then you can kind of enhance the way that the glass would have your sun glow. So they work together, but you can actually craft something a little bit better if you go in here, adjust this, go over there and adjust that. Does that make sense? So with this, you can even adjust the size, right? And look at that, that's like the spread, right? So that's like my spread, that's like my natural fall off. And I'm just adjusting that independent, right, from the light source versus going back to the glow ball. And now this is the exposure, which is like how many levels of exposure, right? And again, I'll show you some elements that you can actually keyframe. So let me hit confirm. And what it does, that applies, right? And then this basically will get transferred over, but you got to make sure that you're in screen mode. Now this is the preferred method. And look at that, now I'm mixing them. So that gets to my next point. You can make multiple instances of the same effect. So you can light this up and then you can draw the flare here and you can even have another flare. You can do whatever you want. You can make multiple instances of the same thing. So you don't necessarily need to have them independent. If you wanted the lens flare itself, like the actual glow ball, to look like blue, and then you wanted orange in the reflections, you could do that. But, you know, just do multiple instances of the same effect, and now you're just using a different part of the effect. So with this, just in case this is burning question in the back of your mind, you can do this on an adjustment layer. Totally fine. The preferred method is to do it in screen mode on a black solid in After Effects. But yes, you can do this on an adjustment layer. Just to clarify that. Now, if I go back here, and let's just go to another shot that I already have finished, and I'll show you. Here's some abstract textures that you just make by cranking up. You can crank up specific elements, and this is just the aperture blades, so the way that the light hits, right? And then these are the aperture blades, and you can use this for like a background for your graphics. You can use this to blend in with footage. You can use this as a texture in 3D. However you'd like to use this, you basically can create your own stock footage with this, okay? Now that I say that, I'm gonna look around and then you can start populating all this new footage on Adobe Stock or something. So, you know, you can make these, and the best part about it is the keyframeable aspect of it is there's an evolution slider, and with the evolution slider, if you just keyframe it to go, you know, 2 times from the start to the end, that's an absolute loop. So even if it's 10 seconds, that's an exact 10 seconds, so it'll just keep looping. So you'll never notice that jump. So here's some of the things that are actually keyframeable that you'll see inside of here. So if I twirl this down, all of these right here are keyframeable and available just in the effects controls without going into the designer itself. So in the designer, you see how many things that I have available to me, but in here, these are the things that actually drive the effect, right? How bright it is, the location of it, you know, everything is here. Here's the 2D position. If you click on the crosshairs, you can adjust where that lives, right? So all of these aspects are keyframeable. You can do them right there in the timeline. And you got a stopwatch next to every single thing right here. Another thing is, depending on what kind of machine you have, or if you have another, let's say you have to have another application open because you're on a deadline and you have to multitask, and then your machine is kind of chugging a little bit, you can also go in here and switch this right, to fast mode instead of production mode, or go to best mode to get the absolute best quality from it. Extreme, I would say, my most honest opinion, I wouldn't go beyond best. Extreme, I think you're just asking for a longer render time. So I would go best and keep it on either best or production if you're exporting this. If you want to just work and you just want to get the idea of what this is, then put it into fast mode. So, but for right now, like I'm on this M1 MacBook Pro, and I'm able to use this lens flares relatively quickly, and I think even on an i9 machine with this new build, you can use your lens flares at a decent speed. But keep in mind, you have this option right here. So if you wanted to, you could actually flip that down and work in the fast mode. So it's basically just like gonna down res a little bit just so you can work. So if I'm in here, these are just some ideas of like textures that you can use. And this is just like, you can make this and you can make it kind of jitter and make it look like a nice like flare that's just, maybe it's for text, whatever it is. You can dial it back. It looks a little bright on this screen right here, but you can dial that back. Let's see here if I'll bring this brightness down. And also it's just literally, you have to click on the right thing like this right here is the 2D position. 2D position is going to rebuild and change that flare. And this is just the tail like cranked way up with exposure. So let me show you another one here. And this one right here is just, I have a subtle starburst that I built, and I'm just rotating it, and it just kind of like sits there and does a little soft pulse every now and then. So when you play it back, it's just doing this nice little dance. And this is stuff that you can use to like enhance motion graphics. Like I'll show you here. I have one example here towards the tail end. Just kind of blend it back, and now you have a nice little something that goes with the graphic. And of course, you can dial in the speed however you like, and then just have a nice little looping texture, and then you can mock up the idea of lighting and the sun. So if I go back here, let's design one of these, and I'll do it on some footage, and then you'll be able to see. So I'll turn this off, and let's go to right here. So now in here I have, and you can see the difference. It's a very subtle effect. All I'm doing is adding just that tail, right? And all I do is kind of put the 2D position right where the light source would be coming from. So when I do that, now it just drags it directly across the screen. So if I go here to Effect Controls, and let's go to the designer. So here's some of the elements that make this that much better than just throwing a graphic on the screen. I can go right here, and this right here is the film plane, the image plane. This is where you dial in the sensor information. How close is the lens to the sensor that's capturing the image? Go here, and I can change this full frame 35 millimeter, like a Sony FX9 or an FX6, or a Canon C300, right? Go to a Super 35, and you'll see once you do it, it changes your flare up a little bit. Let's go from there to, let's look at a Red Dragon 6K. It changes it. You see it. It's very subtle, but these are all presets that are technically accurate, that were built by somebody way smarter than me that knows their numerical values. Math wasn't my favorite subject. So if I go here, here's a Micro Four Thirds. Right? You can see that flare is a lot more compacted and the circles are bigger, and it gives you a more interesting texture. So maybe you didn't shoot it with that Micro Four Thirds, but you really like the way that reflection looks, because if I go here and I hit confirm, now we go back to this footage, give it a moment, it'll update, and you'll see now I have a different looking texture on my screen. And you can go in and you can change that. So let's go to color temperature. It's at 6,500 Kelvin. I'll dial that back and let's cool it off. You can also scale it. So now that looks a little bit more warm. Sorry, cool it off, warm it up. I'm thinking in reverse. So you can adjust this to taste. It can be technically accurate, or B, just a creative decision that just happens to look good. So if you have CG elements or anything you built from Cinema 4D, you can actually utilize this flare on top of anything that you built in CGI. So it doesn't have to be just for footage. It can be like on a logo. You can use it with text. You can make multiple instances of it on the same composition. Now, if I go here, again, you can adjust, and you'll see that I adjust one thing like exposure, and now here you go. But that doesn't really work, right? Because I cooled it off. So I go back to my temperature. I warmed it up. Like I said, I'm thinking backwards right now. So I can adjust it to where it looks like it works a little bit better now, right? And then you can also like adjust this. The good thing about this being in screen mode, there's also, here's another thing to see. If I change this is in like HDR mode. So it's basically an ad mode. I'll change this to video. And you'll see the way that it comes across on your footage. All right, so this is basically a blend mode within the effect itself. And then over here is another blend mode. So you can do a dance between both if you want. And it's just gonna basically limit the pixels and how much the spread is and what's sharp and what's not, what point gets dropped. So, and again, you can go back to the designer. Does it have to be technically accurate? No. I can just like say, you know what? That abstracts it's obstructing my my subject, right? So let's dial it back, and I can just go to the flare properties when I click right here and just like drag this scale down of the reflections. There's a scale option. And then there's an exposure option. And I can drag that down. And then hit confirm. Now it's a little bit more subtle. And then also, like, let's say it's crossing over the lady in the back here, but the lady in the front, if she moves, then now that flare is going to be just right in front of her face. So you can actually keyframe this position here if you'd like. Or just click on it here and then kind of click where you want it to come in from. And you'll see it update. I'll just drag this over here. So you can control exactly where it is because it's coming from your light source. Your light source is basically the end all be all. Everything is going to get moved around based on where your light source is, because that's the sun or that's the lighting that you have, right? So all you do is you can also, let me jump ahead here and I'll show you. You can also track this shot. And I have a shot that's tracked here. And it can track that light source. So let's just jump back. And you can have something like this, where you're tracking that lens flare to that light source right over here. So, and once it's tracked, right? Once you have your light source already animating and it's tracked with where the sun is, you can change the way that looks. I know that one's a little bit big, but you can change that and make it a little bit like, let's go back to that one and I'll show you. There it is. And this one's large, but I can go back to the flare itself, effect controls, right? Open a designer. And let's go and change this a little bit under the reflections. Scale is at like 63. Just make it a little bit more subtle. And then also, I can also change my image plane and make this something like a full frame. Now that looks a little bit more dialed back. Doesn't look so crazy. It's not a bunch of giant circles moving, right? And then you can even scale that. So let's say that's a good starting point, but I still don't really like the way it is. I'm gonna click right here. This is the reflections. I know you really can't see it in this icon, but it's so subtle. You can probably see little remnants of it. And I can just change this scale from this 21 and scale it down just a little bit. And what that does, it's giving you like 3 circles and it's sizing down all 3 of those circles based on that value right there. And then also the exposure, when I crank this up, you're gonna see that that's gonna give me more prominent circles there, right? But if you look at the way that looks, it looks pretty amazing. It looks pretty accurate. So I'm going to click here and confirm. And now you can see it's still tracked. It's still in my scene. But this looks a little bit more friendly. And then right when it gets to the center of your screen, it's pretty awesome. So I go back here. Also, because I changed it inside of After Effects. But this one here I have pre-rendered. So that's not adjusting. But the idea is that's more like what I can see. So if I went from here, right, to here, now you can see some. You can even go in and work with the imperfections in the lens. It's not every single piece of glass is going to be the exact same every time. Like actually all the older glass has a lot of imperfections, and that's the beauty of it, is that it's making these organic textures. So you can texturize this and go in and click on the elements of the glass itself and adjust the coating and the thickness and the color, and every little instance of that will change little bits of your flare. So you can build it from scratch, right? Front and the rear coating. And these are individual elements. As you click, you're gonna have different parts of it. So I can adjust one part and make the curvature of the rear element versus the front element. And when you do that, you're gonna get like something here. Look, here's refraction index. I'm just cranking the slider just to show you. So you'll see that when I do that, these are like all subtle things that you can work with to kind of make something that looks either technical or creative, abstract, or a balance of all three. And for what it is, it's not just printing pixels to the screen and telling you this is a preset and you can't adjust. This is something that you can make technically accurate, which that's the fun part. So if something did not give you those beautiful rays, you can make those beautiful rays. You can go and look at your footage and you can enhance what already exists in that footage. So I go here. Here's one that's very subtle, and it's just a little bit of flare on the edge of the screen, right? And the difference is like that to that, but that will draw out your frame. That's like putting a measuring tape in the room and showing you, the sun is here, the window is there, your source is coming from there to here. Now you can actually see something. So when you're working in this 2D aspect like myself, right, this is my 3D right here. This is how I can trick your eye to thinking that room is this big. Now I'm letting you know. So that's the difference, and these subtle things can do. So the idea is that you can drag out that source and just kind of move it to a place where now I can see my footage. Go open the designer and you'll see a little bit of gate flare right here. I have this, I want to say there's the glow ball, the starburst, and this is the halo. And I'll show you what the halo looks like. Let's just step back to the actual flare itself. It's the halo right here. You've probably seen this. Anybody seen like the Columbia pictures with the lady, watch a movie from Sony? And it starts with the flare and the lady looking like the Statue of Liberty. And then it pans over. It's the same idea right there. You can make your own version of that. There you go. You heard it first. So the idea is this actually has texture. It has this kind of like, in my opinion, this is kind of like what dish soap looks like in the water, right? So it gives you all that kind of banding and chromatic, adjustment. So let's go here. I'll click back on that. That's in the glow ball and the halo. And I can just go to the designer. And in here, you can really adjust. Now, this is two things in one. If I turn one off, there's my halo. And I go back to here and turn this on. I want to say I have more than one. And that's the beauty of this. So here's the glow ball. And then that's the glow ball with the halo. So you can see the glow ball gives me this. And I've cranked up this chromacity. And you can see it gives you kind of different colors in there, which are based on imperfections in your lens. But we want to introduce that because that makes things look organic. It's a difference between things looking synthetic, right? When something is too perfect. All right, so we go here and let's go to the halo. I'll just crank this up a little bit, and I need to turn it on. All right, so if you just see the halo without that. And in here, you can adjust this, add some chromacity, change the frequency. All right, and you'll see, you can even dial in the color. And these are subtle things. You'll see it's not going to be as potent as you may think it is. You can crank up the slider here. One thing that I would say about this, if you look at this wheel right here, if you're familiar with Magic Bullet and Colorista, and even yesterday I was talking about the Super Comp, that wheel is the exact same wheel that you use for all of those other apps. On the left side right here, you have your luminosity, right? Where you can adjust your values of it from light to dark. And then right over here, you have your saturation. And then you can drag the color. So you can do your color cast in the middle here, and then you can actually draw out how saturated that is by cranking this slider here, and then how potent that value is as far as light is concerned over here. So very familiar throughout the whole suite. You have the same tools. All right, like I said, with the designer, or when it comes to color, you have that same wheel across the board. So that's just one way to kind of build this out. And then again, there's multiple elements to this. So this is me like turning them off, and then just kind of paying attention to each element separately and building each thing separately. And again, sometimes you'll find that you don't need it to blast that hard. So you can just have this one part that you animate, and then you cut that off the screen, and then you bring the other part in. So you don't have to have them all together, and you can fade them in and out and use them in different parts of your footage. And they're not necessarily, just because they're controlled by your light source, make a second instance and then put a different light source. And now you can use different elements of this lens flare as just friendly textures that look organic. So I'll go here, let me confirm that. Now I've really just kind of blown this one out, but you can see, again, this is all based on organic imperfections inside of your lens, and it makes for this interesting looking texture on the screen. And the benefit is, if you ever seen, you go out on a shoot, nowadays people love to like take one of these mag light flashlights and just kind of shine it in the camera, and I've seen it multiple times. Like if you have a nice cinema lens and really nice thick glass, you can just like shine the light on the edge of the frame, and people will do it on purpose with a mag light or something like that, flashlight, and just kind of beam it inside so you get a nice little flare every now and then. Now you can just kind of create and emulate that, and drag something off into the corner here. Have something, let's go to the 2D position. And then you can adjust. See, there's the brightness, all right? You can have that brightness kind of pop. You can adjust the f-stop. And then you'll see all the math works together. But if it's really brightness you're targeting, you can even do this and then have it kind of pulse. And if you're an After Effects whiz and you use null objects, when you drag the null object, you parent that. And now you can kind of use that as how your flicker control. As you drag it left, it's like a light switch. So you can use it to kind of do a little bit of pulsing in the corner to look like you actually shined a light into the lens, which a lot of people do to cheat in camera. So you can do that as well. So let's just jump over here. Now I want to also highlight another effect that's in the similar idea, but it just doesn't have all the control that you get from this one effect. And this effect is called Overlight. And this is within the universe effects. So if I go here to Window, Extensions, and I'll go to RG Universe Dashboard. Let me just mount this real quick. So inside of here, I think it's under Glow, or I think it's under Stylize. Let's see. There it is, Overlight. So I'll click on it. And the beauty of this, any of the stuff inside of Universe, if you're using this for just specifically for video editing, you can also use it inside of motion graphics, inside of After Effects, but this works just the same. You can make presets and you can hand them off. And this is like, basically, this is like the automatic. If you want the manual car, then go to the rear lens effect. But if you want, something that's going to do the work for you to a certain degree, this will basically do the dance, and there's just a slider that allows you to adjust the frequency of how much gate flare do you get. So it designs like the corner of the frame, and I'll show you. So let's just go over here. Here's one that has it on there. And I'll show you. This is without it. And then when I add that, it's just that little pop of light, kind of let you know that it was a nice hot day and the sun was out, And the one thing that I would say with this is, like, when you shoot slow motion, right? So this is a slow motion shot, right? That speed of the sun is not going to match the slow motion footage that you shoot. So you change that frequency. It's a little bit easier to dial in on the real lens effect, but keep in mind you have that many more controls. With the overlight effect, these are your controls, but you can control the flicker right here. So there's flicker, the intensity of the color. You can add a different hue to it, and you can actually just work with the presets are really easy, and it's just basically left side of the frame, right side of the frame, invert it. Either, like, if you look here, you'll see the position of it. Where is it? So let's go to, vertical, horizontal, or both. So if I do this, I can just go horizontally, flip that, and now the sun's coming from here. Or vertical, now it's up here. Or both, now it's there, right? So it's not necessarily saying this corner, that corner. It's saying here to here, or here to here, or there. And this is a lot less sliders to deal with. It's already a part of the Universe Suite. But, again, if you don't have time, you're doing like 600 shots and you're just trying to string something out really quick, this is a great pairing with the real lens effect, because it gives you that same idea. You can actually use them in conjunction and just kind of draw out a flare. And now with this, you just have that nice light flicker on the edge of your frame. And it adds a lot of flavor. So it's something subtle, but really it's the subtlety that sells the effect. So like this right here kind of looks like it's vignetting, but when you're getting this much light coming into your lens, it's going to look a little bit more like this and a lot less like this. All right, so you can do all these like color grades, and then you can add this on afterward. So if anybody does work in Resolve, or somebody does, any colorists, right? Any finishing editors, online editors, you can add this as just a texture after the fact. You can blend it back. So it's just like a nice little subtle thing that kind of really makes the full frame pop. And now you've designed all the way to the edge of the frame, and you have something that organic, right? Not necessarily synthetic and just kind of, I drag this shape across to mock up something. This is something that looks pretty realistic. And you can dial in, the frequency. And like I showed you before, each one of these, they have, this is one thing that's great about Universe. Universe, you have these like little animated images, so you're kind of picking from a menu. So it's like if you go to a restaurant, you never tried the food before, and it has a bunch of pictures, that just makes life that much easier. So the idea is I could just select from here. And then another thing that you can do is once you dial something in, you can save your presets. So let's say I like this one here. All right, let's go back to my effect controls. And I'm just gonna go and save this preset. I'll call it Moto Night. Hit OK. Then when I go back to my presets, it pops up right here. And it gives me an image representation of what it looks like from the time I applied the effect. So again, now I've created that menu. So now you can look at what my food tastes like before you try it, right? And then you can also go in here, and there's an option, there's a little star. Click on the star, and then that becomes one of your favorites. So if I click on the star right here, and I go back to the overall menu of everything. There's all the universe stuff. There's a favorites area, and it's right there. So if it's something that I commonly use, now I can just go right to the top, and I don't have to go fishing through all these images and all these effects. Having a lot of different effects is great, but then when you're in a time crunch, that's not so great sometimes. All right, so be able to limit your search, and now you stay in creative mode, and all you're doing is just, oh, here it is. It's right at the top. All right, or thinking of presets. Presets are always a great starting point. So it doesn't mean that you go with the exact preset that you've seen done many, many, many times. You go and you can adjust the sliders, and maybe you did it on these 3 clips. Now you go to these 3 clips and you adjust it and move it on there and adjust it and make another set of presets. So presets are always a great starting point, and you don't necessarily have to use them exactly how you see them inside of as they ship. So, show you another instance here. So just getting back to the real lens effect, the stuff that you can do with it, relighting, right? Adding texture. You can do it independently. You can do multiple instances, and all the different things you can do as far as just having some texture flickering on the screen. You can, if there's a light or you have a practical light in your scene, whether it's CG or whether it was like actual shot footage, right? You can mimic that light source, give it a little bit of a glow ball, and now it actually looks like a legit light. So it's not just a flare, it's also giving you this light source. So you can use it however you want. You can make it look like that light bulb is flickering and it's about to break, stuff like that. So use it for many different things. It's not just necessarily adding a flare across your screen. But since we're here at the tail end, I think I'll wrap it up here.